Hello everyone, and welcome to the second in a two-part webinar series hosted by the IWFM Technology Special Interest Group, which acts as an introduction for FM seeking to use building information modelling. I'm Cathy Hayward, I'm Deputy Chair of the IWFM London region and the founder of Magenta Associates, the workplace communication experts, and I'll be your chair today. So today's session is going to last for up to an hour, and we'll hear from three experts who I'll introduce you to in a moment. But we don't want this to be us talking at you. There'll be several polls throughout the event, so you can kind of share your views. And there's also a chance to ask questions of our panel. So please get thinking about these now, and you can type them into the questions panel to the side of your screen. This is a CPD event, and we'll be giving out the CPD number at the end. So do have a pen to hand then, and wait until the end of the session. So let's introduce our expert panel. You've already heard about me. I've been writing about the facilities management world for the best part of 2 decades. And I'd now like to introduce the rest of our panel. So firstly, Gary Bell. He's the service line lead for BIM and information management at Turner & Townsend in the UK and has over 14 years industry experience. He's the BIM manager on a number of high profile projects around the world. Next is Penny Brinsley at international CAPM provider ServiceWorks Global. She has over 18 years experience in the FM software marketplace and has an excellent understanding of the value of BIM for operational FM. And then finally, Derek Lawrence is a chartered building services engineer advising organisations on the practical implementation of the digital twin using reality capture techniques. He used to work for Arup, but is now doing consultancy for Twindle. He also co-authored the Good Practice Guide to BIM Data for FM systems. So welcome everyone, and I think we're in good hands. Before we start our discussion, I'd like to signpost you to some key resources about BIM and technology in FM more generally. The IWFM Technology Special Interest Group has a community page on the IWFM website and on LinkedIn and Twitter, and there's plenty of debate there, so do visit those sites and sign up. There will be follow-up discussions from this webinar posted in the LinkedIn group in the coming days. And in addition to BIM, obviously our subject for today, there are publications planned on topics as diverse as drones, AI, smart buildings, and reality capture. So plenty happening with the IWFM SIG. But BIM is what we're here to talk about today. The IWFM's Good Practice Guide to BIM Data for FM systems was published last year, but its launch was obviously rather overshadowed by COVID, which is why we're only really just talking about it now. As I mentioned, today is the second in a two-part series. Hopefully you joined us a couple of weeks ago. And that session focused on the what, why and how of BIM data for FM. You can listen back to that on the IWFM website and on YouTube, and the link is on your screen there. So today we're going to be focusing on planning and managing the transfer of BIM data into operational systems, data mapping, lifecycle considerations, and visual BIM. And in addition to the Good Practice Guide to BIM Data for FM systems, which, as I said, was published last year, there's also a guide on the role of FM in BIM projects, which is available on the IWFM website, which is free to members. So do go and download that if you haven't already. Now, I promised that you wouldn't just be sitting back just listening, so let's start with a quick poll. We're really interested here in knowing whether you attended our last session or not, so we can kind of tailor our discussion today accordingly. So to start, can you click on the most relevant answer on your screen? Did you attend the session a couple of weeks ago or not? And then we will we'll be able to, as I say, tailor the discussion accordingly. So brilliant stuff. The majority, 3/4 of you attended the session, and we got a quarter of new people. So welcome to you, and thank you for those who joined us last time. So let's start by doing a very quick recap of what we learned from the first webinar. Derek, can you give us a quick summary, please?
Yeah, sure. 73% of you will know whether I'm making this up then, so that's good. Well, thanks for rejoining, and welcome to those new people. I think hopefully you'll have a chance to have a look at the document, and we did spend, when we were writing it, quite a lot of time thinking about the what's the point, because there's a lot of pushback on BIM and saying, what's the point in using it, and I think no, on the last session we tried to dispel some of these myths about, you know, this just a 3D spinny model type thing. Actually, really, what BIM is the process of, you know, creation and maintaining a database about our buildings. Really, we've done that for many years, but what we're finding is BIM is enabled through technology to be able to do that more effectively and get a bit more insight from the building. So BIM is not a software. BIM is not Revit. BIM is not ArchiCAD. They are tools for helping us do this maintenance of the database, and arguably tools that for FMs that they may not have access to. So how on earth do you maintain this database about your buildings? And we'll get into some of that as we get through this session. So I'm a building services designer by training, so I know about BIM. It's been kicking around for quite some time, and our primary use really was to stop us crashing into each other. So stop mechanical building services engineers running pipes through steelwork and stuff like that. The throwaway comment about "and it will be useful in operations" I think has been harder to realise, and hopefully when we get into questions we can understand perhaps why that's not coming through. I'd really like to understand that, because the uptake from FM hasn't been as you know, as wide as we'd hoped. So I want to try and get to the bottom of that. Is it the way the information has been presented? Are there just too many acronyms? Do you have to, you know, read an ISO standard before you get started? I'd really like to say no. Let's get past that. But we can talk about that later today. The other bit of feedback we got was people like me got carried away and just chatted all the way through it, and we didn't actually talk about the important things, which were the Q&A, question and answers, and we didn't show enough examples. So I'm going to try and stop that today by just doing another slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we're talking about the integration bit today. You may say, well, I run an existing building. I don't have a design or build. So how is this even relevant to me? And we should talk about that as well today for existing buildings. Next slide. And you know, we do have a building to maintain, but really we have a database to maintain, and from that database we should be able to pull out bits of useful information, discuss what is useful to you, because actually you do need to define that. But more importantly, once you've absorbed the information and done something with it, you're meant to put it back. Don't leave it out all over the place. Put it back into the database and let that database grow over time, and that's where we'll start to see some value in this. So that's it. That's a quick recap, like Netflix.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, Derek. So we talked about this in session 1, why it's important that FMs understand the BIM workflow. So from your experience, Penny, can you talk to us a little bit more about how FMs identify their requirements, how BIM data can fit into an organisation's asset management strategy and everyday FM operational skills?
Yes, of course, Kathy. So it may actually seem obvious, but understanding the purpose and the key functions of a building is extremely important at all stages of the life cycle. Setting out clear goals and objectives for the operation of a building can impact the key decisions that are made and what data needs to be collected to achieve these objectives. Whether a building needs to be more sustainable, adapt to suit a more flexible way of working, or to comply with increasing legislation relating to building safety, such as things like the golden thread, FMs need to understand what data they should have access to in order to make those objectives a reality. In the case of new buildings, BIM data can be imported at project handover and used within your FM systems for operations and maintenance purposes. The way in which the building data is used in construction varies significantly with how it's used within the operations phases of the build. It's also really useful to know what the planned use of a building is early on. So some of the things you may wish to consider could be as follows. Is the data actually logically stored for handover using terminology that is familiar for FMs or other stakeholders who would need to access this information? BIM models contain vast amounts of information on all the building components, but is all this information actually needed to carry across into your FM system? And do you just need the data to be transferred across and accessible, or do you actually require a 3D or 2D working model to show the building details and the asset details as well? Next slide. But as you will likely be aware, new builds represent a small percentage of these buildings, and roughly 96% are already built. For existing buildings, the process of getting this BIM data into your FM system is very different, and you would need to digitise this information to make it possible. The digitisation process requires data capture, and there are a number of ways of doing this. And Derek is going to cover this and talk about the various digitisation routes later on in this webinar. But before you even reach this stage, there is an important step around designing and briefing the project, which is commonly can be overlooked. So there can be a push to move straight to the scanning and collection phase without sufficient planning. Briefing involves accessing the core requirements for the scan. This is coupled with understanding what resources you actually have available, both personnel and technology-wise, and then planning the best strategy for scanning the required facilities. And of course, for both new and existing buildings, planning saves money. So identifying your requirements early on means you reduce the need to redo work and also ensure that you have minimal impacts on the facilities that are actually currently in use.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Penny. Now let's hear from our last panelist, Gary. Gary, what is the CDE? We hear a lot about this, the Common Data Environment. Can you explain it in terms of BIM for FM for us?
Yeah, thank you. So firstly, to the AEC industry, the purpose of the CDE is to provide the project team with a secure, central, accessible resource for collection, for management, and for disseminating each information container through a managed process. When I refer to an information container, that's sort of any set of information representative of data that Derek and Penny have discussed about a project. So it could be drawn, it could be a schedule, it could be spec, it could be embedded data within components. But ultimately, a CD is considered a central repository for construction project information and should be considered the single source of truth or the single source of all project-related information and data. The functionality of that SCD is ultimately underpinned by clear management protocols for how that information is created, how it's managed, and how it's shared, regardless of where it originates. So the premise of a CD, therefore, consists of two distinct entities that, when combined, form the basis for managing information during project delivery. So those two entities, as you can see on the slide, are a CD solution. So that could be a system or a system of integrated systems which then support the common data environment workflow processes, and then facilitates the exchange of information containers for varying different purposes. So that could be for coordination, it could be for stage approvals, it could be for verification and validation of information. And then you've got the CD workflow. So that's the varying states at which that information can be generated, stored and relied upon throughout project delivery. So whether that's work in progress, whether that's shared, published or archived, and that's underpinned through the ISO 19650 series. Second slide, please. So why a CD? What are the benefits of it? So traditionally, project information, or historically rather, project information was printed, posted, emailed, issued through FTP sites, and that information was therefore uncontrolled in the sense of there being no common platform, no traceability, no security, no version controlling, which meant then information being exchanged between stakeholders in that uncontrolled manner presented a risk of either uncoordinated design information, stakeholders working from out of date information, and then difficulties actually in locating the latest information about an asset. So through the introduction of your BS and your PAS 1192 standards, and more recently ISO 19650, we've seen this common data environment where all stakeholders can contribute and access shared information model. And when I say that, I don't mean a model as in a 3D graphical representation, but model in the sense of the buildup of data and the structure of that information. The information in the CDA, as mentioned before, is controlled by clear protocols, i.e. naming conventions, revisions to statuses, location of that information, the formats and frequencies by which information is to be shared, and that underpins the sharing of all project information. And then finally, in respect of, I guess, what it means for facilities managers through the delivery stage of a project, well, it's really important that at the outset of a project, that facilities managers are heavily involved in specifying the requirements, and that is through the asset information requirements, which was touched on in session 1, but it's really critical that FM come in at the start, so that we're thinking with the end in mind at the outset. And what it means for facilities managers is that they can specify exactly what information they require to operate the building efficiently. They specify the format by which they require that information and exactly what information that is. And it allows them to dip in through the delivery phase and gateway test pockets of that data as it's being curated, which then speeds up the delivery to operation handover process, because they're verifying and validating that data throughout. And then slide 3, please. So I guess touching on in terms of O&M and common data environment, actually if we just consider a data environment for facilities managers and what the difference is there. So when I'm saying about the CD for the AEC industry, to the FM teams, we'll consider a data environment to be all sources of information that are used to deliver day-to-day services. So when we consider those sources and take a look at some of the examples on the screen, it's critical systems and day-to-day operation of a facility. So that could be room booking systems, it could be a computerized maintenance management system, it could be your fire safety system, it could be access control. There really is a vast range of different considerations. So while these systems might operate independently in some instances, there's also platforms and workflows and processes whereby some of those systems can be interconnected. However, independent or interconnected, these data environments form what's known as a digital ecosystem. Thank you.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks very much there. We've talked before about data mapping, I think, in our first session. So, Penny, how is BIM data mapped into other systems such as CAFM? What are the kind of practical considerations FMs need to be aware of? Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah. So the process of mapping BIM data into your FM system is actually quite dependent on many factors. So this is such as the systems that are actually being used, how the BIM data is presented. For example, is it a COBE, an IFC, Revit, or even in a simple spreadsheet format? Before you even begin the data mapping process, you'll need to decide what data needs to move across. For example, a building might contain over 10,000 assets that feature within your BIM model, but actually only 1,000 of these need to be maintained over time, so therefore need to be moved into your FM system. And also, what level of detail do you actually need and require? Building files can contain vast amounts of information, but not all of this information may be relevant for the everyday use and the maintenance of the building. You will also need to consider terminology used. Is the data in a format that's usable and understandable for your FMs, or does this data need to be altered before it's passed through to the FM system? Most FM systems will allow you to import data via spreadsheets, but whilst this isn't necessarily the most efficient way of working, it does provide the option of getting this important BIM data transferred for one version of the truth. Some providers have systems that are capable with these building files, allowing you to import the information easily. So in the example of COBE compatible formats, the user can automatically import the data from a COBE workbooks into fields in the data processing application. This method is used for systems that don't necessarily have a graphical viewer or capabilities. Another option would be to map your data directly from an IFC file. The huge benefit of IFC files is the ability to graphically see the model. within your system, so you can visually see and locate the asset as well as accessing surrounding information. This means that the FMs can access all the required information through a familiar FM system interface as well. Some providers even have a separate asset database that is integrated into your FM system, which means FM teams can access and maintain assets via the FM system, but other business stakeholders might have the asset information available just in the asset as a database tool. The API link means that the asset data is live, so if asset information is updated in one system, this information is automatically then updated into the other. One of the overarching benefits of having access to the 3D viewer within your FM system is that no specialist skills are required or expertise are needed to view and access the models. Some examples of practical examples where having a 3D view of your building within your FM system can actually drive efficiencies, and these can include things like, for example, if you were to have a pane of glass that was smashed in your building, having access to the 3D model provides visuals of where that pane of glass is positioned, the affected surrounding areas. And when you click on the glass pane in the system, you are presented with information relating to the pane of glass, such as things as its dimensions. This means that your operative may not need to attend the site to measure the pane, and then it can be ordered, meaning the job can be rectified in a much shorter time, because it means you can work out how to get the pane of glass to the site of the location, finding the best route with minimal risk, i.e. not necessarily taking large panes of glass through main walkways, and having the ability to view the area before actually means the operative can plan their visit to ensure that the appropriate equipment and personnel with them to actually complete the job and do it. Another example is, let's say we have a toilet that needs replacing within the building. Having access to the engineering model within your FM system enables the user to access the plumbing connections and also access the data that actually surrounds around the bathroom assets, such as the cisterns, toilet brands, manufacturers, which will allow for the contractor to accurately quote for the job to replace that unit. Also, if panels need to be removed, the plumbers can easily see on the drawings where the panel is located, and if you need to drill into the wall for whatever reason, having access to the model will determine safe drilling places. And, for example, we want to avoid any steels or pipe work. This also helps for the FMs to plan better in advance, which in turn reduces the disruption so that the bathroom can be avoided during key business hours. And also you can reduce the number of times the contractor might need to visit the site. Another example would be more safety critical. So businesses being able to ensure that they're meeting the requirements for the golden thread of information. Having accurate building information available in your FM system ensures that these important fire safety assets, such as your fire doors, extinguishers, etc., are managed and maintained over time, and annual service checks are not missed. This means fire safety assets can be tracked and reported on in real time to help ensure the building remains compliant and safe. It also means that FMs can access the required information through their familiar CAFM screens and interfaces. But this, of course, is all dependent on the software application that you use and what information can actually be carried across. Your software provider should be able to support you throughout the process of data mapping, and they are also able to, and they're also a host of specialists, BIM and FM consultants, who can support you with this process as well. On a final note, it's worth mentioning not just the data input, but also the data output. It's clear the accurate transfer of data is beneficial, and having access to the 3D model helps to drive these efficiencies. But being able to manage, maintain, track, and report on these assets using reporting tools within your FM system is actually really invaluable.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Penny. We've had quite a few questions already, so do keep them coming, and we will put them to the panel in a minute. But let's just move on quickly to life cycle considerations. Gary, can I ask you to talk our audience through how BIM can help with monitoring, maintaining, and managing life cycle requirements? So particularly around like managing life cycle costings more effectively.
Yeah, thank you. Life cycle BIM, so it's the creation, maintenance and utilization of information driven through the delivery phase of an asset to then manage the operation and maintenance of the buildings through the operational life cycle. If we consider sort of the different interactions that you can see on the screen there with the information model and the O&M data that's embedded as part of that, that we've curated or specified, curated and obtained through the delivery phase, and then handed over to our FM team as part of a soft landings process. When I say soft landings, I'm talking about a strategy that's adopted to help the transition from the delivery phase to the operational phase of the asset life cycle, and that's to then optimize operational performance, and should actually, I guess, going back to that critical message, be considered at the outset to make sure that, or to ensure that the FM team have the right information that they require to operate efficiently, and that is information that's required for commissioning, training, and obviously for facilities management in general. In terms of that life cycle BIM and considering the different interactions, if I was to pick out a few on the graphic as practical examples, so space planning or space management, so the room or space information that's driven through your graphical BIM model are beneficial for space management in facilities management, because the FM team can quickly understand capacity of a building or lack of, and then identify where there's an opportunity for reductions. A reduction in cost could be made in terms of actual expenditure within the building. Obviously, one of the critical ones being maintenance. So one of the things that we found through that improved delivery to operations is planned preventative maintenance. So information about building equipment and about maintainable assets is produced or is curated through the delivery phase. So therefore, it's eliminating weeks and months of effort post completion for the FM team to actually physically walk around a site and log and document all of the data about these assets in whatever system that they're going to document it in, or whatever template they're going to use to push into that system. So if you consider somebody doing that manually, there's going to be errors there, or potential for manual errors in terms of data entry, duplications, or even missed entries. Whereas going back to my previous example around the CDE and the interactions of the FM team, we've got the ability to specify at the outset those data requirements, have it curated through the delivery phase, have the FM team integrated as part of that to verify and validate that information, so that come practical completion and handover, we've got a full registration of assets from the building. A couple of those refurbishments, having a BIM or information model that can be transferred to AEC consultants and BIM technicians for refurbishments, then allows the estates team to gain a better understanding of the cost and complexity of a refurbishment, allows for scenario testing in terms of that refurbishment, so they can get a better understanding of the impact of design solutions, for example. And similarly, providing more accurate information to design team, to contractors for refurbishments can help mitigate some of the costs around laser scanning or surveying of an existing building, and trying to mitigate the risk of unknowns coming that affect design, affect construction, timelines, program. And then finally, I guess in terms of interactions in that one, in building performance, and critically now in the UK, sustainability and carbon. So when we're talking about building performance, I'm talking about things like energy analysis to to utilise that information model to better understand energy consumption and reduction in costs through infrared sensors for lighting, for example, but particularly with that growing industry drive around carbon and sustainability, having an information model embedded with rich data around embodied carbon and performance, coupled with smart sensor technology, could help us understand through the operational phase the rate of depreciation of assets, so the impact that that then has on the carbon footprint. So, for example, underperforming insulation might result in overperforming heating system, and it's that considerations. And then if we can go on to slide 2, please. And another practical example here is the example around cost of equality. So, and this is taken out of the good practice guide, but I thought it was important to take you through it. So what we've got here is the assumption of a building's life cycle being 50 years. Within that building, there's 300 doors. So at the outset of the project, when we're going through design and making the equipment selection, shall we say, there's 2 options. There's option A, which is the most expensive hardware option, costing £29.90, and then we've got a cheaper option, which is £9.50. So actually, the total expenditure for option A would be £109.80 in terms of when it needs to be replaced. So whilst it's £29.90 for an individual set of door handles against £9.50, so £20 more considered over 300 doors, obviously seems like a lot of money in that sense, but when we consider the life cycle approach to it and the replacement costs of those doors and the less replacements required through better quality, actually there's a variation there in terms of £42,000 in cost over selecting quality at the outset. And that's the approach that we need to instill. That's the mindset that we need to approach this with. And that's just an example of door handles. If we actually consider things like large mechanical equipment, air handling units, chillers, etc., or we consider distribution units, fan coil units, that in practical application of cost, it completely makes sense from a life cycle perspective to consider the benefits of making better selections. And that's not to say that necessarily that the most expensive one is always going to outperform the least expensive one, but we try to establish a performance baseline and monitor that through the life cycle as well, which is really important. Thank you.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. So let's have a quick poll for our audience. Again, it's a really easy, quick yes/no answer. Have you any experience of using graphical BIM models for operational purposes? We're going to come on to talk about this in a sec with Derek, and it'd be really useful to get your take on this. So have you any experience of using graphical BIM models for operational purposes? See the results come through there. Okay, so the majority, 3/4 of you haven't got any experience. So Derek, armed with that insight from our audience, can you explain what is meant by visual BIM? Be good to have your views on that. How can it aid FM?
Yeah, it's an interesting answer to the poll as well. Is that because the drama of creating a graphical version of the truth is too high? Possibly, I don't know, but let's have a quick dip into that. Before we get too far, I thought I'd hit you with another acronym, because that's what we like. It's really aids communication acronyms, but this is quite an important one to understand. This API, so application programming interface, which doesn't really help at all, even if I say the real words. But the reason, well, what is an API and why is it important? So an API is like a menu in a restaurant. So when you go into a restaurant and you want, what would I order? Fish finger sandwiches. I'm simple. When I order 2 fish finger sandwiches, I've said 2 fish finger sandwiches. I don't really care how they're made or what the process is in doing that, but I would like 2 fish finger sandwiches out of it, please. So the API is like the menu. So you ask it asks for stuff and it delivers stuff back to you. So, and this is the way we talk between bits of software, and the reason for that will become clear in the next slide, please. So, look, it's an example of a BIM in operation. And look, there's no 3D model either. Where's the 3D model? Well, I want a 3D model. Well, there's no 3D model. So this is an example from where I used to work at Arup, where we were playing around. We sandboxed quite a few ideas, and we had a Cisco networking system there, which made sure that people that did work for Arup plugged into the Arup network, and those that didn't. So yeah, a part of that, there was an API that sat with that system that knew when Derek Lawrence plugged his laptop in, we knew where that was wired to the port. So with a little bit of software development work, no new hardware was bought. We were able to take the information asked from the menu to the system and say, tell us what's going on, and then show that information in a picture. So using a picture as a canvas to show the data, so we could see where people were plugged in, and because it was sort of running all the time, we could look at utilization of the floor, we could find people, which is also quite useful. And that's an example of, that's 2 to 3 days of software development time and cost associated with that, no new hardware. So we have this data in our systems already, and using the BIM, using this database we talk about, we should exploit that more. So next slide discovers all these, well, there's pretty things. Everyone watches the video in the bottom left. I'm watching the video in the left-hand corner. But there's a number of ways to capture reality. Existing buildings don't generally have Revit models if they're 20 years old. Nobody even knew what they were. So how do you get a canvas to work off? And this is where reality capture tools come into process. Drones, backpack mobile scanning, static laser scanning, iPhones, that's more interesting actually at the moment, quite disruptive. But you're not allowed to use any of them. No, you're not allowed to use any of them until you've decided why on earth you're using them. You can't just use them because they're fun or cool. There has to be a point to it. So if we go to the next slide, then perhaps I'll talk about one of the points. So this is a video that's run, not live, fortunately, but I do have to keep up with it. So what you're seeing is a Matterport scan here. So a 3D scan of an office, really easy to collect. And what you can do within the Matterport is you can tag objects. And in this case, we've tagged someone's desk. And what we're going to do is, so when we hang over that tag, what it's doing is it's looking with the API at the CAFM system that's associated with that particular desk thing. So that's Maximo in this case. So what we're going to do in this example is we're going to add an issue. So this is a user, a help desk type issue. So the users notice there's a problem with a light. So first of all, they point the crosshair, I don't know why it's a crosshair, but it's a crosshair, at the light and flag whatever the problem with. It's quite important to have direction, because buzzing and flickering things don't always buzz and flicker all the time. So just to make sure someone's not going insane, it's important to have some direction. Notice now it's updated, so a few API things happening there. Tag has changed color to show something's going on, but also there's a new sort of bit of data about that. We're going to add another one about blinds. Blinds always break in this building, so we'll add another comment about that. As we're typing here, what's happening is we're providing information. We're ordering fish finger sandwiches, and that information, the menu on the information, is being passed into the other piece of software, which in this case is Maximo. Once we've done that, Maximo tells us back through the API that we've got 2 outstanding reports, and actually it delivers our ticket IDs from Maximo as well. So it's actually pulling information back from an existing CAFM system back into a view. We can look at the issues, which is good, for people that are going to actually troubleshoot them out on the floor. So if we jump into the actual Maximo version of truth now, this is in the Maximo CAFM system, what we see is that you might be able to read that the text we put in one version has moved over into Maximo. So we're updating our database, that's good. And if we say, okay, someone's sorting it, let's just change that to someone sorting it. So we'll mark that as in progress on the issues that were raised, the blinds. So blinds are done. Let's just change the lighting to in progress as well. partly to show this movement of information backwards and forwards with the API. So both of those issues are in progress now. If we go back to the visual version of the truth to have a look at that, what you'll see is, once it's updated, an attractive brown color. I chose the color brown color on the tag now. So the tag has changed using the API. There's a prize for anyone that works out how many times I say API, by the way. And the status has changed to in progress on both of those things. So somebody goes out, fixes those, and then ultimately you update the database, the record, single source of the truth. So we change both of those to close now. The issue is being closed out. I've spared the argument and drama in between those stages just for the speed. And what you'll see is once those statuses are updated, items are closed in Maximo, so there's an audit trail in there. Then we go back to the pictorial version of the truth, and the tag goes green, and we're back to where we started before the drama started. So that is an example of API passing information backwards forward. It's mostly software development, so no real hardware costs were incurred there. It's just playing.
That was really interesting, Derek. Thank you very much for taking us through that model. Just a final poll for our audience before we get onto the kind of Q&A. Again, a really quick yes/no answer for you. Have you used any laser scanning or photogrammetry in terms of BIM? So again, quicker yes/no answer, and then we'll just review the results there. So before we go into our Q&A, we have a lot of questions to get through. So if you fill those out, then we'll have a quick look at the results. So again, 2/3 of us really haven't there, so that's quite interesting. So thank you very much for completing the poll. And thank you to our panel. I think they're for a really insightful presentation. So I'm going to open up the question to our audience. So we've already had quite a few questions come in, and we still have some questions, I think, to answer from the previous session. So Derek, very quickly, can you just talk us through, there was a question in the first webinar about scan to BIM. How can that aid FMs?
Well, it might actually not aid FMs at all. And I think that's the reason why, people have got varying levels of experience it. So if you had a 3D model, a BIM model created of your building that you're in now, would that help you in any way maintain it? I think the answer would be, well, yes, you could make it help you use that. But do you need to go all the way into modeling would be my question, because the version of the truth is the laser scan. If you laser scan it, or the Matterport, that's a snapshot in time, or a picture is actually a version of a truth. So why wouldn't you consider tagging pictures with the data? Because actually it's all about the data and making decisions based on data rather than going all the way to modeling. At the moment, the way technology is set up, scanning is getting faster and faster and easier. Anyone can do scanning, anyone can do scan. I can do scanning, so anyone can do scanning. But the modeling is laborious, and you can break technicians tracing Revit models I've found in the past. Why would you do that if you can just stop there? So is it useful to have a canvas to overlay data on that represents the truth and how we audit the world around us? Absolutely, yes. How far you go and how much money you spend, I think it depends on your use case, which needs a discussion.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Derek. Right, I think this is a question for Gary. Are there technical standards, best practices for the structure of CDE data, or is this always project specific?
Yeah, good question. I mean, so in terms of practical standards, that you can't go wrong with referring to the ISO 19650 series. There really is a defined process in terms of practically applying a common data environment workflow. And in the UK, it's underpinned with a national annex, which then specifies things like your name and convention for your information within a CDE, your revision that you should apply, the status of that information, whether it's for coordination, whether it's for information, whether it's for approval and acceptance. But what I would say is that if you consider common data environment solutions, there is a number of them within the industry. We'll put a few examples up there just so people can practically understand what a CDE solution is. And it's really having that engagement at the outset with the client to understand what CDE solution best fits their needs, and what sort of element of control and visibility they want around a project or around estates management, whatever it may be, and then making the right solution on that basis.
Okay, thanks very much, Gary. One of the biggest issues one of our audience members has come across with BIM-related projects is that asset-related data in the CDE created through the project that is following the BIM process is not in alignment with the asset data used by the FM teams or in their CAFM. They then struggle to make use of it or don't at all, and have to spend time and money in data mapping to kind of make it work. What are the key steps the panel would advise to avoid this? And they say that COBie is not FM friendly. Who'd like to, answer that one?
I'll jump in. I think that it's the message I think that all of us have said a few times, and it was certainly said on the previous one. It's about getting that FM team involved at the outset of the project. It's critical that they inform those asset information requirements. They're the ones that understand the system they're going to use. They understand the data that's required, and they understand the format by which they need it in. And obviously, somebody mentioned or touched upon COBie. If COBie is of no use to them practically, then there is no need to ask for COBie. You ask for whatever suits your purpose, and you establish that purpose at the outset. And you have to, it is critical, and I can't say it enough and reiterate it enough, that getting FMs involved at the outset is critical to support that operational activity, really critical.
Okay, thanks, Gary. A question for you, Penny. The examples you gave about the use of visualized information presume that the information is accurate in the models. Validation is clearly an important part, so we're not overly trusting potential legacy BIM data. The question is, how can we validate data in an FM building information database?
So, I mean, this is going to be really, really key, because there's no point in putting information into the database that isn't accurate and correct. So that's all part of within the implementation process, is making sure that whatever you're checking, the geography, the room details are all correct, the assets are in the correct places, you've got the correct type, the same type of assets are actually physically there that you've got in your database. So that it's a real key, that audit process of the validity of the data is undertaken, because otherwise really old saying, rubbish in, rubbish out. So super important.
Absolutely. I think there's a kind of, oh, sorry, carry on, Derek.
Yeah. I think the other thing to say is actually validating the physical world is quite easy, because that's where the laser scanning stuff comes in. Validating text and stuff like that is really quite laborious. And I would say, and it's obvious really, but don't try and put too much in at the start. If you're really starting from scratch, just start with a thing and where it is. A fan coil in a room. Don't do anything more than that. Don't even do the manufacturer, because you are allowed to add more later. But if you get the raw data in, and the other thing is engagement. So if anyone that really doesn't want to use the system spots that it's incorrect, whether it's a model or the asset, they will go, well, that's wrong, I don't trust it, don't believe any of it. And actually the value of it can get thrown away, and people just don't know how misaligned with reality their data is. So they tend to either rip it up and start again, which is awful, or they just tend to not use it and just go back to traditional methods, which is, it's a terrible shame. So yeah, just start easy.
Yeah, and I think just to round that off as well, just to add to it at the end, there's also bringing the FM team along for the journey. So I've talked about how critical they are at the outset or at the implementation stage, but also throughout the delivery phase, having them go in and I mentioned it before, going in and validating and verifying the information that is obtained through the information model or through the data set, and testing how that data reacts with the system, to make sure that any changes can be done there and then, as opposed to when it becomes sort of time critical post completion.
Yeah. Also, I've found through implementations that I've been involved with, it can be really beneficial to run a pilot. So you take a specific area, maybe not spend the whole time collating all the data for the entire estate, take a fraction of that, run it a pilot, because that really does help identify what information you as a team need to be able to capture, you know, what's valuable. You don't want to be, you know, bouncing off a little bit what Derek said earlier. What's the point in capturing data on information that you're never going to use? So that can be really beneficial as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Are the data standards being used now for existing buildings the same as data standards currently in use for new buildings? Who'd like to answer that?
I mean, I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because whilst the standards that exist, typically they relate to how information's generated now, as opposed to how it was previously generated. And whilst there'll be synergies there and lessons learned from that, there's possibly not the myriad of the two. So that's why you see a lot of a lot of the key messages that are coming out within the industry about clients digitalizing their estate, and pushing the boundaries in terms of how they manage those estates as well with that data, because historically we've just got that old process of data specification in simple forms, and not pushing the boundaries in terms of what we can achieve now through smart sensors, for example, and data that we can obtain from them to manage a building more efficiently. Whereas, as I say, historically, that process didn't really exist in its rich form that it does now.
Okay.
I think the other thing that's the challenge is what you call stuff. Where is it and what do you call it? So the where is it is probably easier to deal with than what you call it, because there's not really there are many naming classification systems that don't map together nicely. So I think from FM point of view, then SFG 20 naming classification standards and the NRM stars, they're okay. But a lot of new build stuff are using Uniclass or Omniclass, which doesn't particularly map nicely. I think if you've got an existing building, then deciding what you're going to call stuff and deciding how you're going to locate it is a big part of the discussion, and it's a choice. There's not, you must use this standard. It's a discussion again, sadly.
Okay. An interesting question here. Who would bear the costs for training the supply chain to understand the BIM information, and how would FM get the supply chain on board in relation to use and awareness of BIM?
What is the cost? What is the cost of what are these costs? I mean, and this is the same question that was asked in the you know, go back to, you know, HMP Cook and Wood, the BIM exemplar projects that I worked on. Who's going to pay for this BIM stuff we're going to generate? And the answer was, well, nobody. You're just going to do it because it's going to move. And now you go, whoa, that's not practical. But what happens is there'll be a shift change in this, and it will be a case of, you know, anyone that's charging for it will be going, well, we're not going to use you. And arguably, you know, we're trying to sell this on the basis of the benefits of it, the insights, you know, the idea that with this richer information, you will be able to save money, even if it's, you know, someone goes out to fix something, they know a building, the room where the light that's broken has been reported is 6 meters high and not 3 meters high as they guessed, then there's two trips saved there in dealing with that. So I don't know whether anyone's going to pay for it. Really, I think it's going to be just there, and people will use it, and they'll go, well, now I'm using it, I can see the value in it, so I want to use it more. What else can I do with it? And I think it'll come like that. I don't think waiting for someone to pay for it will actually. I don't think anyone will pay for it.
Yeah, I would also say to that as well, I think that if you consider maybe, say, I don't know, design consultants, for example, they've gone through this digital transformation where they've gone from drawing boards, they've gone to CAD, they've now gone into, say, Revit, for example, or ArchiCAD or whatever it may be. So they've gone through that digital transformation. The same has then happened with project managers, where they've then gone through this digital transformation in terms of how they utilised information that's being produced. And then similarly, your FM teams need to go through that journey as well, and through that sort of digital transformation. And it's partly there for consultants to support them, and as I've said a few times now, taking them on that journey and sort of blue sky thinking, the art of the possible. But as Derek rightly says, starting with sort of that very first foot approach in terms of simplification and what's achievable now, short term, what your long term objectives are, and what the long term possibilities are as well, and getting them on that road to their own digital transformation in their world.
Okay, and we haven't got enough time to answer all the questions which have come through, which is fantastic, but we will do our best to answer them on LinkedIn afterwards. Somebody has asked for Derek's email address, so we will introduce you after the event. Thank you for that.
Yeah, my name's not Twindle, actually, my surname. I might change it to Twindle because it's quite a catchy name, isn't it? But,
Twindle is a good surname. Maybe you should think about that.
Derek Lawrence on LinkedIn usually works as well. So yeah.
Okay. But I just want to thank you as a panel. I think we've really built on the knowledge that we kind of learnt in the first session, and hopefully the audience feel that. I quite like Derek started off by saying that BIM is not just a 3D spinning model, which I think people often do think of it as. I think it's, hopefully we've helped to educate the FM market, because obviously the uptake of BIM within FM is not probably as much as we hoped it would be. We talked about transferring BIM data into operational systems, and really it being kind of crucial from the start to identify what you're looking to get out of it. Don't just do it for the data for the sake of it. We talked about the common data environment being a single source of truth of all data. We looked at different options for data mapping, which I thought was really interesting, and Cycle BIM. I really enjoyed the visual demo from Derek. I thought it was a really great way to set it all out. So thank you very much for that. And if this topic has piqued your interest, and there are lots of resources on BIM that you can access both on the IWFM website and below, which you can see on your screen now. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a CPD event, so if you are recording your CPD, then I should let you know that today's CPD number is on the screen, 2086097, so that's 2086097. Thank you once again to our panel, Gary Bell, Penny Brinsley and Derek Lawrence, to the IWFM Special Interest Group on Technology for putting this event on, particularly to Hazel Bedson at ServiceWorks Global, who is the mastermind for these two events and has been working very hard behind the scenes, and obviously to you, the audience, for participating and all your fantastic questions. We hope to see you at a future event.